So this is my project. It's called Sandunga Nunca Muere. There's really no translation for the first word, Sandunga, but in essence, it's part of the Zapotec tongue. The Zapotec is an indigenous community found in the southernmost tip of Mexico, in the part of Oaxaca. So Oaxaca is like a really big state, but it's kind of like a cone. So like in the most narrow part of the Isthmus, that's where the Zapotec culture is located. So the word, in essence, it means a very beautiful female identity. It's usually it's kind of like an accolade that you use for like a very, very beautiful woman. So the reason why I took that title was because there is a female artist who sings traditional music, and the name of her album was God Never Dies. One of the main reasons why I came to Oaxaca was because the Muxe community has a very has a relationship with the Catholic Church, which is not really seen anywhere else in the world, where the Catholic Church actually opens their doors for a queer identity. So I chose to change the word God and replace it with the queer identity that we have, and it's essentially Sandunga just never dies. And it just goes to say that we've always been here before and after colonization in the history of humanity. There's always been the queer identity. So these are my friends. This is Shaneri, she's in both of these images. Mario Ruben, Caricia, and this is a photograph from La Regada de Frutas. So I'll start off with this one. So when I first met Shaneri, she used to go by Damian, and it was one of those things because like when it's so amazing to see the growth that we've had together ever since we took this image. In this particular photo, in an interview, she had mentioned how every time that a Muxe is born, essentially a flower is born and it smells like flowers. And that's kind of like the purpose of this photograph, was kind of like that reemergence of like a rebirth of having your true identity, your true self come to life. When she was in her mom's belly, her grandma would come over and she would like rub her belly, and from that instant she already knew that she was Muxe. So it's one of those things that it's already like embedded in like the cosmos. It is in the Zapotec culture, her spirit animal is the hummingbird. And so it just goes to show that everything is kind of already part of the universe. So we used this and we added the flower petals, and then we used the resplandor, which the resplandor is a very, very traditional piece of garment from the Isthmus and the Zapotec culture. If you see a lot of Frida Kahlo paintings, especially self-portraiture, you can see that she's wearing one of these. In essence, it was used to like mimicate like a halo from the Catholic paintings of the Renaissance. And so we wanted to use it because it's something that is so particular to her heritage. And so we wanted to make homage to her identity itself as being something that is also close to divinity. I think in most parts of the world where you would find First Nations, in most First Nation cultures where you find a queer identity is usually sometimes assimilated with a form of divinity, of like a dual spirituality, where you have kind of like an amplified broad version of humanity. So for this image, we essentially went to the agave fields. Everywhere in Oaxaca, all along the north part of Oaxaca, you see them grow the agave crop, which is used to create tequila, and in this part of the country, especially mezcal. Mezcal is a liquor as well, but it's also considered an elixir. So if you go to like, when I went to Oaxaca, this part of the valley, we went like in the morning, like early in the morning. We went to like the market, and interestingly enough, like there were like ladies around their 80s who would wake up at 6, walk to their market, go across the street, take a shot of mezcal, and then go shopping. And I'm like, yeah, and it's just part of the culture. You know, you don't see it as a liquor, you see it as a pick-me-up, you see it as coffee, we do over here. And for that reason, like back in during the time of the colonization, they tried, the Spanish essentially conquerors tried to get rid of the agave because they were saying that they blamed the agave for getting people drunk, to doing unchristian things. And in that list of like unchristian things, they included what they call sodomy. So what we wanted to do is that we wanted to use the machete because it's such a form of rebellion. You see it in a lot of paintings, and we wanted to, and I called it machete al machote because that was something that was already written on one of the walls in Oaxaca City, where they had a protest against femicide. And it just goes to essentially tell you that femininity should not be assimilated with weakness. Like, I think that's the common misconception in most toxic masculinity, and is that they consider you that when you are a female or a female identity, that you're already like submissive and like less off, point blank, period. So we wanted to just use this. It's really, really windy in Oaxaca as well. So the moment that I had the opportunity to use a very flowy dress, I was like, yes, please. So so we shot that a little bit further north from Juchitan. Juchitan is like in the narrow part where like the actual Muxes do come from that part of like the Isthmus. Because that kind of brings me to this point, is that the Muxe identity is very, very protective of their identity, and they don't allow anybody to just call themselves Muxes. It's kind of like the French in Champagne. Like, you're only like Muxe if you come and you're born and raised from Juchitan, which is something that she struggled with because she was born and raised there. But then she had to move to the coast, which is maybe like 30 minutes? It's like saying like 30 minutes to an hour away from the main city. And for that reason, a lot of times, like, the other girls from the town would be like, well, you're not really from here. And I'm like, she was constantly trying to like fight for her identity and like know that she grew up with the same customs, traditions, and it is her identity. Mari was a whole different thing. Mari was born a little bit further north. Mari was born closer to the fields, more like towards the valley rather than like the isthmus. And so at one point, Mari had the same struggle that Shanetti had. But Mari was like, you know what, I make my own money, I don't need you guys. And if, by tradition, where Mari is from, they don't dress like the Juchiteca woman. Like, this is very much traditional, these garments over here, very much like Frida does. Like, where you have the roses and the ribbons. But instead in the valley, what they do is that they use tlacoyales and they put them on their braids. And so when we thought about this picture, I really wanted to use the tlacoyales because they were part of Mario's identity already as it is. And we had already used them for a previous photo, but usually they only come to your waist. That's how long they always make them. So instead, I asked this friend artisan of ours to make them really, really big, because I wanted Mario to have like that, to give him agency over the photo, to kind of like be extravagant and to just have that the moment of like, you know, of grandness. So that's where we commissioned these over here. And this dress is made by a local designer from Oaxaca City. And I think what I love about Mario is that he is part of the third gender. Absolutely, especially from from Oaxaca, but Mario does not consider themselves to be Muxe for that same reason, for the fact that they weren't born in Juchitan. Caricia, however, was born in the Isthmus, so it's almost like saying you're born in New York City. Like, there's different boroughs, and if you're born in this borough, you're allowed. But if you're like born, I don't know, in Yonkers, or like you're not allowed to call yourself a New Yorker. It's kind of like the same thing. But Caricia was born in a small town right there in the Isthmus. Caricia was the first Muxe to ever be elected to public office. She's always lived her life by her terms. At one point, Caricia was able to get married. She found a love of her life. Muxhes were never traditionally allowed to be married in a wedding dress, nor were they allowed to get married at the church, even though like once a year they're allowed to go to church, because we'll get to that later. But Caricia did it anyways, you know, and then she went and she ran for office, and she got elected as essentially the mayor of her town. And she did that by just going door to door and letting people know that, you know, she actually cared, and that she always made herself present. And she always told everybody that if they needed anything to call her, and she was always there for them. Whereas the people that were running against her were essentially just raising money. And she's still the mayor. She's been there for more than 2 years already, and 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 yeah, and I think I mean, what I love the most about her is that she's also so, and she's beyond humble. Um, she's one of the most transparent people I've ever met in my life, and I think everybody's super kind. But yeah, she made a great impact because she essentially has no fear. She just lives fearless. Um, okay, so then this is essentially once a year, and the Muxe community gets together towards like the end of November. There is like an advocacy group called Las Auténticas Intrépidas Buscadoras del Peligro, which in essence means the authentic intrepid searchers of danger. And it was created more than 44 years ago. And essentially what they do is that they raise awareness, and it's a community, it's for Muxes, by Muxes, to protect themselves and to raise funds. So like towards the end of November, they throw a party, because almost every weekend in Juchitan there's a party, and it's like a 3-day party of like non-stop drinking. But like once a year, all the girls essentially have their pride, they hold their pride. And people from like 2,000, 3,000 people from all over the world come over. And so you can't deny, whether you get along with Muxes or not in town, that you're gonna profit from it, you know? The dressmakers, the flower arrangers, the people that do makeup, hair, everybody in town makes a cut because there's so many people coming in, including the church. The church during that week goes and they host a mass for the Muxes to come in. That's the only time that a Muxe is allowed to enter the church wearing their garments. Like any other time, they have to wear a men's outfit. That has changed a lot too, because you know, girls like Caricia, and you know, when this is your true self, you're not gonna change for anyone. This is the first day of the party. In essence, it's like a week of culture. But on Friday, they walk down the streets, essentially take on the streets as a parade, and everybody in the town comes out, and they throw beads, and the Muxes in essence like present themselves and make themselves to like this the main park in the middle, and they just play music. But that's kind of like the beginning of the week, and then after that it's just like partying Saturday, and then the coronation of the queen on Sunday. And so the queen that becomes the queen of the Las Auténticas is essentially the representative and the advocate for the Muxeidad for the rest of the year. Yeah, I think that's it for the most part. Does anybody have any questions? Thoughts? Mm-hmm. Of course.
Do you have, like, I guess, an opinion about, like, I know you said that the Muxe are specifically born in that region for them to call themselves, and do you have an opinion about it? Do you like it? Is it how it's supposed to be? Are you neutral about it?
Yeah. I think interestingly enough, when I went to meet Caricia for the first time, she was giving a talk at a press conference about reporting acts of hate. But the discussion mainly focused on like acts of hate by outsiders of the community and how to report that to the police. What we talked about was like how there's acts of hate within the community and how do you handle that? Because every single one of these girls has told me that at some point, like I mentioned with them too, someone that was like an elder in their community was like, you know, you're not good enough to like be one of us. Who do you think you are? And it's not something where there's a lot. You would think there'd be more like of like a willingness to like help the next. But I think it's one of those mentalities where like us in a marginalized community, we're already looking out for ourselves. So we're like, you know, we can only look out for ourselves. We can't look out for somebody else. Like there's only room for one person, which is not correct. And I think it's something that really has changed a lot, especially in the difference in generations. I appreciate the fact that you want to protect your identity, because like I said, you know, especially the woman of Juchitan has already been used by so many people, including like Frida and like other people have made her famous already. So I guess that's why they're very, very protective of that. But for the most part, I think I, for the most part, I think everyone, I think everyone should just, everyone might be similar, but it's different because there are so many different indigenous communities already. There's so many First Nations groups that you don't, your customs and traditions are completely different. I don't think it's really my place to say who is and who isn't or should be called Muxe. I just don't think that that should end up in some sort of like even verbal or like physical harassment. Yeah, of course.
I have two questions.
Yeah.
And also a comment. I love the portrait of Claricia. She stands apart a little bit from the other ones. They have a much more kind of serious, and she's powerful, but also seems very approachable.
Yeah.
So it's like amazing to hear that she's there and how she sort of knows about that. And then two questions. One, I'm curious about like if you could talk about the collaboration between you and the people you're photographing. Like, do you sit down and have a conversation, decide together? Like, what is that?
Yeah.
And is it part of their vision of how they want to see themselves, and you're helping them achieve that? Or?
Of course. Ideally for me, that was always something that was in my mind was, when you photograph somebody, there's always that power set up. You can't deny that you're going to take a picture of somebody, and there's somebody in the front and somebody in the back. And I think all of these were collaborations. Like, I got to know Mario, and essentially everything started because I reached out to her through Instagram before I even knew I was going to come to Oaxaca. And I already knew who she was, and I loved her stuff. And so I originally went to Mexico the first time because I was going with a friend and I was gonna photograph her. She's a designer, and so I was gonna go photograph her pieces. But I was like, I also worked as a producer prior to that. So like, I know about making a schedule, trying to get the most out of your trip. And I was like, if I'm gonna go take some pictures. So then I spoke with her and we got together, and essentially she's like, well, I know a lot of friends, I would love if you just photograph, the rest of us. So she introduced me to a lot of people, and for the most part, it always starts with me. Like, I don't just show up to take pictures with my camera. I start a dialogue, whether it's by phone. It's 95% of the time is always in person, and based on what they tell me, it's kind of like the reason of how I approach a picture. Some of these are premeditated. This one was definitely planned out. This one was planned out. This one was planned out, that wasn't planned out, and that wasn't planned out. This one, I met her at the talk, and essentially I photographed her there. I'm like, she's a busy woman, she doesn't have time for me to like set up something up, let's just do it here and now, you just gotta be ready. So I'm glad I had my camera. This one was supposed to be a reference to a Helmut Newton picture, but it came out completely different, which I'm very happy about. To go in with a reference and then coming out with a picture that doesn't look anything like the reference, I think like that's the best feeling. And because we knew that we wanted to do something that was borderline sexual, but also like not sexual, but like, we wanted to serve body and show that it's a vessel, but also we wanted to have something that was like primitive, of like something that was so Muxe that it could be undeniable. And it's kind of like her saying, I am Muxe, this is who I am, and no matter what you tell me, this is what I am. And so we did that one. And everything just happened to like work out. Like, the timing was divine. During this picture, it was at a hotel, but there was also like a stop. Like all the students essentially did a blockade of the airport. So there was nobody checking in or out of the hotel. So I was like, we have this pool essentially for ourselves. I was like, we're gonna use this pool. Yeah, so that was that. And then for this one, I knew that I wanted something that was a statement of power, of like standing against femicide. I wanted kind of like a call to arms in a way, in essence. And I'm so happy that we had the machete available to us, because that's always been such a beacon of like, a big middle finger to like to colonization and the patriarchy in itself. And then this one, like I said before too, like we had already talked about it, and we had a previous photo where we had the tlacoyales, but I think for this one we definitely wanted to have that sense of like a bigger, like a more grand thing. But yeah, And then this is more documentative. This was essentially me just being a part. A lot of the pictures that I brought back from the documentary perspective, I didn't really use in the series. I feel like it was better to, no, it's nice to have them for like context and to show, but I think I prefer the ones where we actually have some kind of premeditated thought about why we shot these, in other words. Yeah.
I have a question. How high up were you on this photograph? Because even the bottom part, there's no reflections of anything, just clear water. I love how that blends in.
Yeah.
The background. Straight up. Like how high were you?
Yeah. I was on the second floor, I want to say.
Like on a balcony.
On a balcony, and I shot it down. Yeah, and it's crazy because, you know, the inspiration literally came from me working as a producer and assistant and other photographer, and I fell in love with using long lenses. And I'm like, you can do so much with a long lens. And so I think that's where it came from. It's like I really gives you a little bit of perspective when you have that amount to play with. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I'm all set. If there's any other questions, we'll go.
I have one question.
Yeah, totally, no worries.
So I'm so curious about the, you were saying like somebody gets like elected as a sort of representative.
Yeah.
Is that something that has just always been? Was that like this community coming to the church and saying, hey, we need representation? Or like how did that come to be?
Yeah. So the person that essentially pays and throws the party is called the host or the mayordomo. And you sign up years in advance. And essentially you raise funds throughout those years for when the time it comes for you to host this party, you're able to host it for everybody. That is not the person that gets elected though. The person that gets elected becomes the queen. And so the queen is something that you also financially contribute to the party, but you take on as a responsibility knowing ahead of time that you're gonna be the one that is gonna be speaking at like press conference and any other event where you need to like have some sort of communication. My friend Amitai, who I also photographed, she ended up being queen the longest out of anyone because of the pandemic and you couldn't have it. She was queen for like 2 years. But she was queen for 3 years. But she was usually only have 1 year, and every year they become elected. The person that became elected this year, she's actually the first person to graduate from law school from Muxe. And so she is una diputada. Yeah, and so she's she's big on advocacy and bringing change and equality to the community.
But it's been around like decades, hundreds of years?
Oh yeah, no, I mean, this has been around, the community, las auténticas intrépidas buscadoras de peligro, which is the organization that has been made by Muxhes for Muxhes, and that does all of this, essentially has been around for more than 45 years at this point. Yeah.
And there's been a queen elected
Every year.
45 years.
Yeah. Crazy because if you think about the New York Pride Parade is 51 years. So yeah, there's legacy in other parts of the world. Yeah.
And it's so cool to meet you and see this work during Pride Month here.
Yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate it, guys. Thank you. Appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed it. Yeah. Of course.